everybody. Thanks for this. This is P here, joined by Ian Barker of the USC. Our core value this month is empathy. And Ian and I had just had a great conversation prior to getting on. And this one's going to be a doozy. It's going to be brilliant. Ian, thanks for joining us. Please share your journey with us.
You're welcome, Chris. And thanks to the Rush organization for doing these webinars, because I tune into a couple and I certainly catch some of the recorded ones. And my brother and my sister-in-law work with Rush down in Wisconsin, so I know Rush very well. Just real quick, because Chris asked me just to give a little bit of background on me. I've been in the country since I graduated university in England, so I've been here since '87. Whilst I've done some coaching around the world, some learning and taking American players, I very much consider myself an American coach, because that's all of my training and most of my coach experience. A lot of college coach experience in Division I and Division III. I worked with Olympic development back in the late '80s, and I continue to work with a very rejuvenated ODP program today, and had some really good experiences recently with ODP. My primary role right now is coach education, which I know is close to Chris's heart, and some of the things that these webinars are designed for. So I can talk very well or a lot about coach education. I would say my strongest allegiance is probably in the youth game, more at USYS, because I was a state director for Minnesota. But I work closely with Christian and ECNL. I work with Mike Kalina and the people in US Club, Scott Snyder with AYSO. So the challenges of youth soccer, only further complicated by the development of the DAs on the boys and the girls side, is something that I deal with on a daily basis, as I'm sure most of you do. And then really, we do a lot of high-end things. We take coaches over to do UEFA badges, and we do the convention, obviously, and I'm on a fairly select audience here. But the truth is, the majority of what I do on a daily basis is support grassroots coaches through in-person courses, online courses, and then I'm a bit of a Twitter dog. So if people want to follow me on Twitter, I'm just trying to get to 12,000 this week. So if I can get a few Rush coaches to follow me on Twitter, that would be my payment for being on this morning.
Okay, so we'll try and get you to 12,000, Ian, and you have to follow me though if you don't already. So,
no problem.
So you came over in '87 after university, and if I'm not mistaken, was it Coventry or Warwickshire University that you went to?
Yeah, so I went to a university in England called Warwick. It's in Coventry. Warwick University sounded better than Coventry, because Coventry at the time was a pretty tough city. I was very fortunate. We had a very good soccer program, so I stayed for 4 years. I took an English FA badge while I was in college. I actually was the club captain, so I organized it. And we had a lot of PE students, so that was a useful thing for them. So I did actually, excuse me, get a coaching badge while I was in college. But then I'd made some connections in America, so upon graduation in '87, I came straight over.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think we may have been in Switzerland together, Ian, and I think you shared the story that maybe Don Howe was sitting, I think it was an Old England FA legend, was sitting in one of the lectures.
Yeah, so if the audience, most of your audience are probably too young, but back in the day, there was a very famous series of coaching education programs set up by the English FA, and one of the star men was Don Howe, but the one I knew was a guy called Dave Sexton. Dave Sexton had been a manager. He'd been a manager of Manchester United and Coventry, and when he was let go from Coventry, he became the England under-23 manager. He won 2 European championships with them and was a legend in English football, but he lived 3 miles away from our college. So just for fun, he would jog 3 miles in twice a week and coach us. So here I am, a modesty talented college and amateur player. We had an England national team coach was coaching us just because he wanted to keep his hand in. So that was a good experience. And he and I became friends, which got me access to some FA Cup tickets back in the day. And in return, he was doing an open university degree at the time. Those were sort of online or remote degrees. And so I took him to a couple of my classes at university. So there I am sitting with a 60-year-old England national team coach in philosophy 101 on a Monday morning. So that was a really nice experience. Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, I mean, that maybe even started to shape you and your coaching education back then, before mentors were and mentoring was in per se.
Yeah. So David Sexton was an England manager and what would have been First Division Premier League coach, but he was quite a standout in as much as he was not bombastic. He wasn't a yeller and a shouter. He was a very quiet, understated man, which is unusual, certainly for the time. And I could make that case. It's quite unusual for now. I mean, he probably had a little bit more Brendan Rodgers in him, if you will, if you follow English football, than say Klopp, Mourinho, those types of coaches. So I was very fortunate because my personal style is a little understated, and then I was having it reinforced by a legend when I was in my formative years. I think when I came over, like most of us, especially British people, we talk too much, we're too animated on the sideline, but I had that knocked out of me pretty quickly when I got here.
Yeah, guilty as charged back in the day, looking back. And then, so 87, you said you got tickets to the cup final. If I'm not mistaken, was that Coventry Spurs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I got cup final tickets from Dave Sexton for the Everton Man United Cup final, where it had the first ever sending off. The next cup final, there was an Everton Liverpool one in there, and I got tickets, but I had a lot of mates at college that were Liverpool and Everton fans, so I gave them to them because I felt a bit disingenuous going. And then the Coventry Spurs year, I was teaching high school in Coventry as a student teacher, and it was a rough environment. But the day before the cup final, the kids could all wear sky blue, the colours of Coventry, to school. So no teaching was done, it was just a circus. And then when they won it, the town pretty much shut down for a week. So student teaching was actually quite easy because we didn't have to do it.
Yeah, that was actually my first cup final and only cup final to date. I remember my brother dragging me up, going up the M6, M40, whatever it was, and getting to that game. But yeah, I just wondered whether we were in the same place at the same time.
Well, what's interesting about that though is, so 2013, I was at the coldest I've ever been at a football match as a player or coach, which was the MLS Cup final. So the 2013 MLS Cup final in Kansas City, very memorable to me. Some of my former college players took it upon themselves to go out to the MLS Cup final in Atlanta a couple of years ago. So what's really nice is you and I are talking about our experiences as young men, young kids in Great Britain with these memorable soccer moments. And what's nice is now in America, we're starting to develop, in addition to World Cups and Gold Cups and things like that, but the league, certainly the men's league and the women's league, when the games have been played at somewhere like Portland, they become memorable experiences. So my co-worker Alison, her kids can all remember their first MLS game, which is quite nice. So hopefully in 30 years, they're talking about that too.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I mean, obviously, I came over doing camps, with North American soccer camps, and then became Major League Soccer camps. So we were there for a lot of the Chicago Fire games at Soldier Field. So, watching some of those games and just being a part of that when basically it was ground zero when the league came in, after the NASL and those legends. But just it's been unique to watch that grow and watch the fan base grow, and then all the hoopla around the draft, which you guys also used to host at the convention, right?
Yeah.
So that was, it's been fun to watch. And kind of relive my childhood, and like you just said, those childhood memories and stuff like that. But so also you coached Division 1, Division 3, and I believe it was 94, if I'm not mistaken, Madison, Wisconsin, with Jim Londa.
Yeah, in 1995, the Badger team I coached, we had a very exceptional group of talent that was composed somewhat by luck and somewhat by judgment, and we ended up in the Final Four in Richmond, Virginia, with Portland, Duke, and Virginia, which were big programs. And on that particular given weekend, we were in pretty good form, and we won the national championship. What's interesting about it is that the attendance at the final in '95 is the biggest attendance for NCAA men's soccer tournament in history. So it hasn't been, they haven't got to 20,000+ since. So part of the reason was '95, it was a different time. There was less soccer, so people went to the NCAA, and it was at a small venue at 20,000 seat stadium at Richmond. And then the NCAA got a bit greedy and moved it to American football stadiums, and people didn't go. And now they set the sites, which I think is okay, but I also think you can make the case in NCAA, you'd be better off with one of the Final Four teams hosting, because then you'd be guaranteed some crowd.
Yeah.
Part of the reason we had a crowd was Duke and Virginia were in the final, and we were in Richmond. So, but we back in '95, it was 20,000+ people watching men's college soccer.
Yeah, which is remarkable when you think about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think Alistair Steele, was he a part of that group?
Yeah, we had the makeup of the team, the backbone of the team to some extent were 3 boys from Vardar. Michigan didn't have men's soccer. Michigan State did, but these boys didn't want to play for Michigan State. And the year before, Indiana had spent their money on 2 of the best players from Michigan and Todd Yeagley, Coach Yeagley's son. So Indiana was not in the market because they'd spent their money. So we used 3 scholarships to get 3 boys from Vardar. We had 2 Norwegians, Alistair and Lars Hansen. Lars Hansen scored the winners in both games. And then we had a whole bunch of Midwest boys, Minnesota and Wisconsin, obviously, 1 from Colorado, a couple from Illinois. So we had a really nice group. And like I spoke to Bob Gansler right around the time we won it. And he said, you're not the best team in the country, but you're one of the best. And for that weekend, we were the best. We didn't play Virginia, which was probably good. Duke did us a favor and beat Virginia, but we beat Duke in the final.
Yeah, and that's amazing to look back and think about that. You know, if my math's correct, that's 25 years ago, quarter of a century already, right?
Yeah, they just gave us a heads up just literally this week, Nick Pasquarella. They want us back in October to watch Indiana, Wisconsin soccer, and then they want to walk us around the field at the Wisconsin-Minnesota football game, which will probably have 60, 70,000 people, and they won't know why we're wandering about in the middle of the field, but we'll be there. So yeah, it's 25 years, it's a long time.
Yeah, it is. A message, first statement's just come through. It says, hello, Ian. I love all that you are doing. Just want to say hi. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. And that is, of course, from our president and CEO, Tim Schultz. So he just wanted to give you a shout out.
Is he in Costa Rica today, or is he in the
No,
US?
he's in the country. He's in the US. He's in the US. I believe actually, but I'll have to check my device to see where he's at.
If the guys on the call aren't familiar with the joys of Costa Rica, which myself and Tim are intimately, get yourself down to Costa Rica with the team, Costa Rica soccer tours, or just go on vacation. Beautiful, beautiful country, great soccer. And I know Tim's a big fan, and I'm certainly a big fan.
Yeah, me too. I was lucky enough to do that trip twice with our select group, back to back, and they are just wonderful people. The people at Costa Rica soccer tours, just big timers. So Ian, let's so Dave Sexton was one of your early mentors, right? Let's talk about the importance of being a mentor, but then finding a mentor, right? Being a mentee, and you know, what is the USC doing? What are your recommendations on that space?
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, because my and I think I covered this briefly in one of the other webinars I did with you. I would say I had a number of really big influences in my career in America: Jim Launder, Fred Schmaltz, Tim Carter, later on John Leaney at Macalester College, and certainly Joe Cummings inviting me to be this position I have now with the NSCAA, now United Soccer Coaches. But I've also spoken about how those were not intentional relationships, and I probably, on reflection, have been very grateful for the opportunities, but maybe the coaches that were my mentors or my supporters were just being good guys. They were good professionals. So there was no formal relationship. So I've often spoken about the need to be more intentional with that. At the same time, there is some research that says the best relationships are the informal ones. So I'm kind of torn between how much intentionality. We do a program here called 30 Under 30. So we take 15 young aspiring male soccer professionals and 15 young female aspiring professionals, coaching professionals, and then we put them with mentors, people from our academy, the likes of Janet Rayfield. It could be a Tim Schultz, could be Carrie Mayer, Barker, my sister-in-law. And so they're paired up with people that could maybe help them. And they spend a year basically just being on each other's speed dial. And going to convention, seeing these relationships form is really powerful. And one of the things, if you participate as more of a mentor, you have to be open-minded and be prepared that the person you're helping is very likely to make more money in the game than you do, and it's very likely to have more opportunity ultimately as the game expands. Certainly in the case, and Tim knows Jim Launder very well, Fred Schmaltz, at the end of the day, I've traveled more, I've probably had more opportunity for different compensation packages, but that is paying it forward. So be it a director of a small rush club, be it an age group coordinator within a rush community, you're always looking for coaches that you deem that their sincerity of their intention is good. So it might not be they're the best performer. You might look and say, well, this guy or girl is a really good coach. But when you evaluate them, you say, you know, they're not really part of the rush system. They're just here for a paycheck and they're going to bump around. Or their ego is such that they're trying to go somewhere else. So I'm not looking so much for the best performer. I'm looking for the balance of ability and character. And then I believe that that balance between ability and character creates performance. So, and then that also then, as the older person, as the mentor, you have to be self-aware. So if I want to work with a young spark plug of a male coach who's going to kick down a few doors, make a few mistakes, and I'm prepared for that type of, and to help that person, then I've got to have the personality that I think can respond to that. If I'm overly emotional, too responsive, too quick to fire up a negative email, maybe I'm not the best person to help that coach. So, but I think all of us as professionals, if we can be satisfied with our compensation packages, if we can be satisfied with the amount of work we have, finding opportunities, much like these webinars, to just share a little bit and to pay a little bit forward, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And, you know, about 4 years ago, I think we started the Rush Mentor Program. And, you know, Matt Saul, Steve Davis and I came up with the idea. Matt Saul breathed life into it and did a job with it that, you know, I couldn't imagine possible. And, you know, we get 40 plus people applying, and then we end up with, go through a process where we end up with 6. So we want to keep developing and expanding that and do some blended online, in person. You know, we meet at the convention, which has been a great meeting for a lot of us to network and move on. But we want to continue because we want to leave that legacy, right? We want to keep, you know, planting planting trees that we may never see the shade of. So just paying that forward, and just, you know, I'd love to hear more about the 30 under 30 and some of the things, just so we can maybe implement within what we're doing, and how that just makes the game better, like you said, by paying it forward.
Yeah, so one of the things that just comes to mind while you're chatting, on our website at no cost, we have a little webinar, short thing about diversity. It was written by our LGBT coaching community. We have another one about countering sexual assault in the game that was done by a professional organization here that we collaborate with. So one of the things I might do, and it ties into this adult learning coach education, is ask all of your coaches, a bit like a book club, ask all of your coaches to go on and look at that, the people you're working with, your mentor group. Go look at that e-learning piece, and in a week we're going to come back and we're going to unpack it. And maybe you assign one of those young coaches, or 2 of them, to lead the first 15 minutes of the discussion. So something they took out of it. I really like that type of learning because you get buy-in, as opposed to, and I think most of your coaches will appreciate, we're so far away now from the lecture type environment. We're much more into the blended learning. We're much more into encouraging the learner to access content first and then give us their response to it. And then as the person in charge of that process, you're not abdicating responsibility. You're still managing it all. You're assigning tasks and you're monitoring, but you're giving them much more empowerment into the learning process.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I had a conversation with Alex Twitchin, who does some coach development around the Open University and the FA, which I introduced you to. And Twitch said exactly the same thing, right? So they developed a course with Stuart Armstrong out of England, and it was a coach developers online course, which takes about 24 hours that I took. And they talked about, he was going into boxing and different sports, and they were piecing it out and said, okay, you two take the first 2 chapters, you guys take the next, and then report back to the group. So you're not having to do all 24 hours, but like you said, empowering people and involving them in that learning journey as you manage them through that. And I know, obviously, the USC has just released a coach developers course recently, right? Which I think obviously goes hand in hand with what we're discussing. Tell us a little bit about that coach developers course. I know Sarah McQuaid is involved in it, who's absolutely brilliant. I saw her for the first time at convention on a panel with Johnny O, Mark Willow Wilson, and then Todd Bean. And I thought Sarah was absolutely brilliant. And it turns out we were at Solihull College of Technology together in the same time frame. So her and I are going to do something and try and connect around putting processes in place for volunteer coaches and how we better develop and hold standards and expectations for these coaches. But tell us a little about the coach developers course and how that came about and how that's going.
Yeah, just before I do that, I'll give a quick plug for you and your coaches. So I shared with Chris yesterday an adult learning thing from the UEFA. So hopefully, Chris, you can distribute that to the coaches. Also, just yesterday, Vince Gansberg published our most recent Coach Educator newsletter. I'll send that to you for you to share around your group, because that jigsaw methodology where the group breaks up, they do individual report backs and they come, we call that jigsaw coaching. So I'll send you all of that, and then the people on the call can actually see some content. Sarah McQuaid is an English woman. Her big sidekick is a woman called Linda Lowe, a Scottish woman, lives in Florida. And they worked a lot with British sports. They work with cycling, they work with cricket. So these are not sport-specific experts. So when we do the course, the Coach Developer course, we've done 2 in this inaugural year, one with New York Red Bull, and then one with Minnesota Youth Soccer just last week. Typically about 24 in the class, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's absolutely something, whether through us or independent of us. I would recommend that the Rush organization brings Sarah and Linda in.
Ian, sorry to interrupt you there, Ian, but I was actually going to say maybe this is we could do a USC Rush Coach Developers course. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe we can be one of these people.
Yeah, like I say, about 24 is a good number. So there is soccer in it. So we take one of our courses, one of our grassroots courses, and that sort of ties through the course. So we send all the material. The coaches are typically way more experienced than the 4v4, 7v7, but they have to go and do little vignette presentations. Maybe they do the classroom piece or they do the field piece. It's not assessed in a pass-fail type environment, but all the time, Linda and Sarah are putting you in different working groups. They're assigning you tasks. You're going into different meeting rooms. You're sitting on the floor. You're putting posters on the wall. Maybe you're creating a 2-slide PowerPoint. Maybe you're using some of the technologies like Kahoot or word clouds and things like that. So literally for the whole course, you never sort of sit down and get told what to do. You get put with your peers, and we're always mixing you up. So it's a little bit hard to explain because the magic of it is undeniable, and the testimonials we've got back are really high. One of our challenges is we've had a tough time explaining what it is. So in a crude sense, and this is quite crude, it's sort of a train the trainer. So it would be definitely for experienced coaches who want to do a better job of sharing their knowledge with other coaches. So it could be the head coach for college, it could be an age group coordinator within Rush, could be some DOCs or senior coaches within Rush that really need to pay it forward. And This is something that I think if you took this course, you could then take the material that we provide or US Soccer provides and share that with young college coach players who are going to be coaches or high school kids who are, it's just a real, there's a real catalyst with it, because as soon as you start throwing this content out, it just spins off. It's a really good course.
Absolutely. Just domino rallies, you know.
Yeah.
You start one domino and we never know, right? Every player that we're coaching could be a potential coach, right? And we want them to be coaches on the field and empower them and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a coach, actually, interestingly, from Columbine. I don't think he played with Rush because Rush was just starting up, but I'm sure Tim would know him. A guy called Wes Hart was a big player.
He was a Rush coach, yeah.
Yeah, and so, yes, he was, because I worked. So Wes, I recruited to Wisconsin, and we were there for a couple of years together. Had an MLS career, and now he's obviously coaching women's D1 college. Fantastic player, great kid, and 25 years later has turned it into a very, very good career. But he did it the right way too. He came out of college. He, like you say, worked for Rush. I remember that now. Did some college coaching. I would never have had him tagged as the most likely to coach, but he's one of them. And I've number of the young men I coached at McAllister, which is a very expensive college, akin to a Colorado College, a Bates, a Brown. Some of those guys coach for a living. They don't make the money they should if they've done their economics, but there you go.
So that's brilliant. Just a couple of statements, not questions per se, but this one's from Pablo Toledo, who's a part of our coaching education team, and just saying, Ian, thanks again on behalf of Rush and everybody for taking time to talk with us and chat with us. As I said to you offline, Damon Frederick was on. Damon's quote is, Chris, Ian was my C license instructor. He's my absolute favorite. For sure, he's one of my informal mentors. He says, I'm sure I was his favorite student also. Ha. So I've given Damien the opportunity to maybe hop on with us and present some questions. He's probably racking his brain now, scratching his head, thinking about the questions he can ask you, but we'll keep moving on. So Ian, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about player-centered approaches, right? A lot of people, and I don't know whether you've seen the video of Chris Cushion, right? How we perceive ourselves as coaches. And I think it's something like 14% of coaches get that right, whereas 80% of the players get right what kind of coaches we are. Let's talk a little bit about player-centered approaches and the shift and what you've started to do as a coach developer, a coach educator, and as a coach to get to that player-centered approach quicker.
Yeah. So I took my national youth license probably somewhere in the early 90s. And that was really the first time we started talking about player-centric. And I think at the beginning, it was considered sort of a bit warm, fuzzy, and there was no meat on the bone. I think since then, as we've invited more academics, especially in America, but certainly around the world, into the game to understand child development and understand young adult learning and adult learning, I think we've all realized how many mistakes we made when it was the coach standing up with a clipboard and a baseball cap and a whistle and a stopwatch and a group of people sitting around his or her feet. I think hopefully we're way past that. I will say that you don't want to go too far the other way though. So you can't let the lunatics run the asylum. You can't let the tail wag the dog. And there are some times, and it's a crude example, but I like it, is if you're teaching a young child to cross the road, there are some non-negotiables, right? And so maybe it's technical training, possibly it's some tactical requirements in game execution, which aren't negotiable. The players may be invited in to have a discussion about it, but ultimately the coach, there's no guided discovery here. This is the coach saying, this is the way I want you to defend on corner kicks, or this is the way I want you to head the ball. That said, if we make it a very short-term stimulation, so we reward the kid, we penalize the kid, you can sustain performance for a short period of time that way. But if you want players to show up and be motivated, if ultimately you want them to make decisions in real time in the games and not look to the bench, and maybe you get them into environments where they can't even hear you, then you need to foster learning and active learning in that environment and certainly turn it back over to the players. I had fascinating, absolutely fascinating experience in Scotland in December, which has changed a lot of the way I've been thinking recently. We had an hour with Paul Scholes, ex of Man United, an hour with Darren Fletcher, ex of Man United, and Scott Brown, who is currently the captain of Celtic. They each gave us an hour of Q&A with video, so you saw video of them. And then at the end of it, we got all three of them together for an hour. And this was consistent throughout. They talked a ton about technique. So they watched themselves on the screen and they said, and it's Paul Scholes going against Real Madrid or something. He's like, in hindsight, I wish I'd taken an extra touch. It's like, all right, okay, fair. But they talked a ton about technique. They talked a lot about the physical demands and how they had to prepare for games. And they talked a ton about mentality. So they were all quite consistent, especially the Man United guys, that the quality of training at Man United was so high that if you didn't show up with your A game, you weren't going to perform. They said that playing for Man United was more challenging than playing for their national teams, that at times Man United was better than the England national team, Scottish national team. What they didn't talk about of the four components, so if our four components are technique, physical, psychological, and tactical, they didn't talk about tactics at all. They didn't say Sir Alex came out and did this, or Tony Pulis did this. Only Scott Brown mentioned briefly Brendan Rodgers from a tactical standpoint, and given that his coach was Neil Lennon, then Brendan Rodgers and now Neil Lennon, it was kind of interesting too. But what was absolutely fascinating, and it made me start thinking back to when I was a player, all of the X's and O's we as coaches like to do because we don't get to play anymore, and we read all the books and we've got all the magnets. I think we might want to reconsider how much we do that now and get much more individualized in our coaching, and whether it's little emails or chats with players, obviously within the security and child safety things. But Chris, this is the technique I need you to perform in this game, and you need to link up with one other guy, and I need you to get 10 hours of sleep on your back 2 days before the game. And when the kid to the next, your teammate who tends to be down on himself drops his head, you're a good enough player to keep your head up and to get his head up, as opposed to this is a 4-2-3-1 today and you're playing the 7, but sometimes a 6, and you're a hybrid of a 6 and an 8. I actually think we've got to talk to players and put ourselves more into that. So empathy was a word you used at the beginning. Yeah. Huge about that right now, which then again informs the way not only the content we coach, but the way we deliver the content we're going to give. So now we're giving, and I think Tim would probably be a huge proponent of this. We don't do enough technical teaching anymore. We don't talk about the body position, plant foot, shape of the hips, having a look before you receive it. That's gone out of a lot of our curriculums, and I think it's going to cost us as a nation if we don't catch up to some countries, maybe the Germans, because I think we've got a little bit too theoretical as coaches.
Yeah. So a couple of things you said there, Ian. Everything you said was brilliant. A couple of things piqued me there, right? So in the player-centered approach, how do we address the lack of technique being taught, and how do we teach that technique in that player-centered approach, right? How, in your opinion, what would be the best way to incorporate that, where we're giving players still the decision-making ability, but what would your advice be to the people that are on and that will watch this later?
Well, at the level of a rush organization, even at the top end of the rush organization, but certainly your mid-tier and your lower tier, the number one thing would be for parents to put their kids in the backyard with a ball and invite 2 or 3 kids over to stay in that backyard. And parents have sort of rotating soccer slumber parties. So, okay, we can't go down to the park and the neighborhoods are big, but there's a piece of land somewhere, a backyard, especially in suburban America. And but make them go out, ask them to go outside and play, encourage it, support them, because what is the point in you running the best training session you can run 3 times a week for 75 minutes if they don't see the ball until the game time? So I think that's pie in the sky, but it's also part of the parent education. So they pay a lot of money, invest a lot of time to be in the rush program, I don't think they're getting their value out of it if they're not supporting the ongoing learning of their child. That's my opinion.
Soccer homework, example, soccer homework. As a club, can you set up free play, and then hopefully that starts to happen in the green spaces like it used to when we were younger.
Yeah, I mean, if every suburban Rush parent that had a small backyard would buy a couple of pug goals or infinity goals, and then as much time as they spend driving them to your trainings, sitting in Starbucks waiting for those trainings to end, is pick up 2 or 3 of the kids, and each mum. So there's some sort of football babysitting almost. Yeah. But we have to do better at that, and there's no point telling great stories about being a scallywag in Great Britain and throwing down that's rubbish. That's gone. But we can do it. We can do it with intent and not make it seem formal to the kids. So I don't want the kids out there. I don't want you. Some homework's all right, some skills tests, and come back and do skills tests. But just let them go play pickup. I mean, you get 5 kids. How do you do it? You probably play 3 versus 2 until the score gets big, and then you play 2 versus. I mean, kids can play games if they're allowed to play games. So that's the first thing. Technical training. The challenge with technical training is that part of the huge challenge is that I don't think parents think it's good value if they see you doing a lot of technical training. Sometimes I would be worried about what the customer wants to see at your training sessions. Things which are unopposed. So somebody's going to write in and say, you never do soccer training sessions unopposed. I disagree. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Agreed. Sometimes you do rondos, sometimes you don't. But lots of repetition, lots of activity, so movement, so not static, drills. Drills are for dentists, exercises for English teachers. We do activities, right? So there are activities, plenty of balls flying around. Sometimes there's explicit information. This is a plant foot, this is side foot, this is outside of the foot. Sometimes the challenge of the activity requires that the ball is played with a certain weight. So a great example, and I still do this as a warm-up activity. You get 4 kids, two and two across, knock and move, right? So they're just knocking and moving, fine. 2 touch, 1 touch, pass and move in a line. It's great. The other groups are doing it. Gets a bit ragged, you fix a bit. If you put 2 cones down now between the 2 lines and say 20 times through that gate, 2 touch, not 1, not 3, but 2 touch, the level picks up, the quality picks up, and the technique is improved in part by the challenge because they can physically adjust. So I believe it's got to be deliberate practice. That's on us. We've got to set up deliberate practice. And then what we talk about is immediate feedback. And then we talk about, obviously, practice makes permanent. So you put little challenges in. You do have to individualize it at times. So at some point in that training session, you've got to say Chris 2 times, and you've got to say Tim 2 times and Ian 2 times. Chris, great with the right. Let's do 2 extra reps per, every time you go right, go left twice. That's my challenge to Chris. But it's now, Chris is like, it's not a generic comment, everybody use your left foot. It's like, Chris, use your left foot twice times as you do your right. Tim, next time, can you put more mustard on the ball? Can you put more mustard on the hot dog, more heat? Because it's not getting to Chris quick enough. So now there's something that Tim's like, okay, coach has evaluated the quality of my pass, the strength of my pass is not good. Chris has evaluated, it's not quite, I need more left foot. First touch gets caught under your body. So that requires a lot of work on the coach's part, but instead of just a generic over the top, set up the activity and then work the room a little bit. So I like to do activities where everybody can keep doing them, and I can pull Chris out, give him 15 seconds of insight and stick him back in. So it can be done. It can be done. And then, of course, the bigger game activities, as you get into the latter parts of training, have to tie back into that technique. So if you've worked on passing and moving, and now you've got lots of throw-ins in your game, the ball's not on the deck, so the kids have got to spend half their time getting the ball on the deck. If you work on receiving the ball out of the air, then put a lot of throw-ins, high ball situations. So you've got to manage the whole session.
Yeah, just tying it in and making sure that there's transfer and
Yeah, exactly.
relation.
Transfer.
Brilliant, brilliant. Couple of questions. Damon, Damien again. He said you mentioned rondos. He said you had a great Twitter conversation a while back about rondos. So if you want to throw something in about rondos, but you did say sometimes we do them, sometimes we don't. But I think the misconception is, Ian, is people don't realize sometimes the rondo is done just for connection. Hey, we're just here. We're just going to connect a little minute. This is the prelude to training.
Absolutely.
Times, right?
Yeah, so we'll come back to rondos, but this is the same for me as this play, practice, play thing that everybody's all of a sudden so excited about. I'm not convinced about the transference of the play, practice, play model for learning the way it's maybe expressed in some quarters. But what I will say about play, practice, play is it's a fantastic management tool for a rush coach to set up a couple of little fields, and as the kids come, they drop into it, and then after about 10 minutes, the rush coach now knows he or she's got 13 players or 14 players, and you've had an idea of, are they equipped? Are they ready to go? So it could just be a management tool. So for me, rondos, like you say, it could just be just go play keep away. And every professional team I've ever seen in the world, players by themselves will go play keep away, and they'll make it competitive and they'll talk smack to each other. That's a rondo. It's not a coach-led rondo, but it's a rondo.
Yeah.
What Damon's talking about, which was my response to some people on Twitter who had said they had been told in different places, you must always do this or you never do this. And I am adamant about this, and I hope Tim's comfortable with me saying this. Outside of child safety, words like always and never should go out of our vocabulary as football coaches. Because there are times when an unopposed training activity is really helpful. And it might not be at the beginning, it might be in the middle. There are some times when having boundaries and grids and direction is where we need to be, because we're trying to build towards the game model. Sometimes the field can be wider than it is long. Sometimes there might be 2 balls in the session. Do we play with a neutral and all-time offense? If you've got an odd kid, do you have him sit out? Or do you have one team play with 8 and one team play with 7? Because that's a different challenge. I really worry about people trying to do the Chris P copyright soccer or the Ian Barker copyright soccer. I think that's BS. I really do. I think that football is a series of somewhat immutable things and then tons of color around it. And anybody that tells you there's, with all due respect, a Rush way or a Madison 56 away or a, I don't know, a DC Stoddard way, it's football. You might have some philosophical underpinnings, but at the end of the day, your training should be flexible and have variables and be manipulated. So I'm a big believer, and I did a whole session of rondos at the convention 2 years ago, and somebody slaughtered me 2 minutes into it on Twitter. Why did I come to the convention to watch a 14-2 versus keep away? Well, it morphed into a really, really good keep away where it was 1 touch, 2 touch. We put kids through the middle of it. You couldn't pass it to the kids to your immediate left or right. So now the kids on your immediate left and right were switching positions. And that was the first one of 7 rondos. And the session got good. It got a lot of love, ultimately. So don't judge people too quickly. And but avoid the always and avoid the never. That would be my huge takeaway.
So no absolutes.
No absolutes.
And I think it's important there. You know, sometimes as coaches or coach developers, we might go past the field, we see what's going on, and then we automatically deem the session to not be good. Yet we don't know what the objectives are of the training. So, for example, the neutral may have been a kid who's returning from injury and is on restricted contact. You know, some of the things. So never assume, right? Or, well, there I've gone, I've just broke the rule and used the word never, right? Always and never.
No. I agree, and I want to talk about that real briefly, because this really aggravates me. When I walk up to a coach in his or her environment and it's a break and I say, why were you doing that activity? First of all, the why should not be a threat, right? So maybe it's, what were you thinking when you were doing that activity? And they're playing tag. And he or she turns around to me and says, well, we just had a game the other day. They're tired. I wanted to get them activated physically and get them buzzing, and tag does that. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, maybe not a line of 16 kids kicking the ball once. That might be a bit of an issue. But who are we to judge the other coach until we've asked them what their thought process and decision was? Now, if the coach says to me, I've got no idea, so my decision was I didn't make a decision, that's a coach that I can maybe help if he or she is open to it. But if the coach at the end of the training is still doing 4 versus 2 keeper ways, but he's done a 55-minute training session and he's just been working on somebody in possession, 2 people in support, somebody with a split pass, receive it, get it out, and that's the session, doesn't need to end up even numbers, 2 big goals. Never going to end up 11v11 in most training environments. So everything we do is manipulated and adjusted to what we deem as the coach, who is the expert of his or her environment. Nobody is more of an expert than that person. So
I like that.
Animated about this. Sorry.
Yeah, no, listen, and then that's that passion spills out, and it needs to, right? But as you said, like the Rush way, the 56ers way, I think these things serve as foundations, and ideas, and then people can kick in, like you said, because the game, you never get 2 games the same, right? And there's an absolute, right? That pass is not the same, the timing, the whatever, right? So we have to be flexible. And I had this conversation that the best ability is adaptability. And the debate went on with US national team's top scorer, and he said, no, the best ability is availability, because you have to be available to be adaptable. So we had this ongoing conversation, which was great. This is a question, Ian, from Bill Behrens, and it says, how do you personally balance your core beliefs as a coach and evolving principles, methods of coaching?
It's a good question. I'm fortunate because of my stage in my career that I can take positions on a matter of principle. So I can avoid doing something that I don't inherently believe is in the best interest of the long term of the game, because there's another gig I could potentially go to. A younger coach, let's say in the Rush organization, first time in the club, may be asked to do some things, some training protocols, some communication with parents and things they're not completely comfortable or sure about, but it's their first job. You've got to pay your dues a little bit and you need to put food on the table. So some of those compromises are very personal. In my case, it's a ton of ongoing learning. So I watch a ton of football on television. I present at a lot of conventions and clinics, but I also attend a lot of the sessions when I'm there. And it's never discounting too quickly any piece of information I get and then sort of blending it in. So to some extent, we're all a little bit Frankenstein. All of our coaching ideas are pieces and bits we've borrowed from other people, and then we have our own unique Frankenstein monster. So there's nothing wrong with Ian Barker's philosophy, but it's not something you sell as the answer to world football. Like the Rush way, there's a good example here. We've got Legends, which is Andy Barney, fantastic. Tons of technical, so you can pick a Legends team out, and that's their particular style, and it's great. But it's not, and Andy would never say it's the only way. So I have my beliefs and core philosophies, and but I'm willing to share them, and I'm willing to defend them, and I'm willing to adjust them if I see better information. And I can keep talking while Chris looks at me from wherever he is. So, so I guess, yeah, I can't hear Chris. I think you should type a question to the audience if they can hear you or hear me. I am very much still here, Chris. Oh, okay. All right. So it's me running the webinar, and Chris is here listening maybe, but can't speak back. So I think we're close to time here, and if Chris can't get in for questions and things, if you type a question into the box and I can see it, I'd be happy to answer it. My Twitter handle is I for Ian Barker Soccer, so I Barker Soccer. I'm looking for Twitter followers, and I put a lot of content out on Twitter. United Soccer Coaches website has about 1,300 pieces in the library and the online learning. And right now, if you register as a coach with us and you don't pay any money at all, you get a month's access to our website. So there's more resources. And then my email address is ibarker@unitedsoccercoaches.org, and you're welcome to email me anytime on individual things or collective things. I'll give Chris some resources to share with you all. And but my full-time job is to support coaches, and the Rush Club has been a big supporter of my organization, and Chris is doing a fantastic job with this. So if I can be of any help to any of you, please get in touch. And it's 10:55 my time. So if Chris gives me a signal or a thumbs up or whatever, I'll be here. So, or he types me a message. Damien.
Chris is notorious. I think the
can you hear me now?
Yes. Beach. Yeah, of course we can hear you now.
Okay, good. Now we brought you back on. You can stay on, Damien. Now we brought you on. My sound came back, so brilliant. Damien, fire away with your question, seeing as you're on.
Yeah. So we've talked about basically that there's seemingly endless amounts of right ways to coach, right? So if you have a technical director that has, maybe they have 50, 60, 70 coaches that all have unique personalities, but as a technical director, a director of a club, you have to kind of lead the charge for your group. Sure. How do you develop a methodology, a curriculum that is still able to be adjusted for that individual personality?
I think you need to provide a solid structure. So these are the core principles, the key philosophies of Rush. These are competency expectations. So we expect players to achieve these competencies potentially by age or by level. Understanding that competency acquisition is stages and it's not necessarily chronological. So you may have 8-year-olds which are already hitting the competency levels of your 10s, and you may have 8-year-olds who are still at the competency level of your 6s, and it's an ongoing progression. So I think first of all, the club and the director has the duty bound to provide that overall structure. The next part is your acquisition of coaches has to align with that content, or you have to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the coaches you've got and then place them intelligently within your structure. So gender, obviously, age, competitive level, amongst other things. But I think age, gender, and competitive level will be the three first ones. So when you interview that coach, you get the sense that they've just come away from a US Soccer B license and they're all about X's and O's and periodization. Maybe you're pushing them up to your older age group kids who can survive in those types of training environments, and the coach is really sort of programming them to go out and execute and perform in the U17 state league. The ones that you need to get right in terms of placement more than any other coaching group is in that 6, 8, 10, because that's the lifeblood of your club. You need those kids coming back as paying customers, and you also need, we as US Soccer need better fundamentals taught, more love of the game. So I don't have all the complete detail if I was sitting next to you and looking at your club, but one, you do your job, which is get your things in place, and then your secondary job on top of that is then the correct placement of your coach.
Yeah, brilliant. Tim Schultz just typed this in. He says, really good stuff. We are grateful. I could listen to this type of talk all day. So Tim's loving this. So Tim's, we're lucky to have him on with us, and he does a great job. So this question comes from Deborah Scholes. Deborah is a retired PE teacher and works in our youth program as a volunteer coach. She says, how important does mentorship foster growth of youth soccer in the US? That's the first part of the question.
Okay, so it's brilliant for the club to have teachers, phys ed, any teachers in the club, because these are people who are trained to work with children. They understand child development. So get more teachers in the club, pay them. But yeah, big believer that one of the best resources for clubs is going into the teachers in the summer who are unemployed. I think you can teach them, it's easier to teach them soccer with their teaching skills than to teach a soccer coach the skills of a teacher. I believe that. So I think a great resource. In terms of mentorship, I think it's important that each coach feels connected to something greater than his or her team, because I think we can all respond that at different times being a coach is quite lonely. At the grassroots level, the sad picture of the coach picking up cones, picking up balls, picking up lost and found by his or herself when everybody's left is a really sad picture in youth soccer, because the coach feels abused, lonely, left behind. So anytime we can pair our coaches up, maybe they get there 15 minutes early or they stay 15 minutes late to watch another coach, join in the warm-up of another coach's session, get a cup of coffee, contact through these webinars, because I think what all of these types of informal sharing, if not mentorship, but sharing, I think is what keeps you coming back. And I've been fortunate through my career to have a lot of friends, players, peers, subordinates in terms of experience, tons of people above me with more experience. And I've always been quite inquisitive, and that's the strength of Chris, and it's the strength of the people that are on this webinar. So the question is human connection outside of the training environment, but within the soccer environment is absolutely key for the long-term health of the coach.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, and little things that we've tried to do. So we ran a winter skills program this year, Ian, and then we opened it up for the coaches to bring their child, and we gave them the ability to A, be a part of the session, B, observe the session, or C, lead part of the session. And then, you know, we could have dialogue and do some feedback. We had about 10 coaches this winter take part of it. The other thing, you know, we talked about the mentorship and we talked about legacies. The other thing I'm trying to do is put together people from different sports of the same age and just talk about their experiences, right? And what are some of the struggles? How did you overcome that? And just trying to bring together the community through doing that, the community of sports, to make it better for children.
Well, this isn't completely related to the question, but it comes off of something you just said. So I had some amazing successes in some of my grassroots programs where the program required that a parent attend with the kid. And then we did the session with the children and the parents. So I'm talking grassroots, 6, 8s, 10s. So everybody gets with a partner. So Chris gets with his kid, Damon gets with his kid, Carrie gets with their kid. And so the activity is a collaborative activity, the child and the parent. And then after about 10 minutes, you say to all the kids, go find a different adult. And the kids can do it. The adults feel very uncomfortable when some random kid comes up to them. But be it for your parents and or your coaches, sometimes doing something like that completely flips the paradigm. So now all of a sudden, I'm an athlete and I'm working with a 6-year-old, all right? I'm now the athlete and I'm working with somebody else's 8-year-old. And I just think those types of definitely conscious, like little curveballs you throw at your program, I think are really interesting. And some of them fall flat, but when you hit one, it's like parents want to be more involved. Your coaches are more interested. Now, oh, I can work with 8-year-olds. I never thought I could work with 8-year-olds, but I've got my own 8-year-old kid. Turns out I can work with them. So I love that type of stuff.
Yeah. And you know, we're getting there. It's a working art, as it were. But you know, Deborah goes on. She has a second part to her question, and she says, "How do coaches at these ages who are volunteers gain better training from a club?" So we touched upon that briefly. We do, like I say, we hold coaches meetings. When I first got to Virginia Rush, I had no responsibility. Well, I didn't say have no responsibilities. I had no teams. And in the last few years, you know, I've been added to teams, and I run our School of Excellence program. So my time has become kind of dwindled, and I don't get out to see the coaches as much. But we're making a change this year where we're doing some free clinics where we're bringing the coaches into us and bringing the kids into us. But then we're also getting coaches to go out and see the coach in their environment.
Yeah.
You know, what else would you suggest that we do there, Ian?
So I believe that what the majority of grassroots coaches want as the number one thing is some activity plans in front of them. So I have a ton on my app, and the club director can tweet them out or text them out an hour before training and say to all of the grassroots coaches, when you get to training tonight, start with this activity. You could do that. But helping your grassroots coaches with colorful manuals or online resources so they've got some activities. I think that's what most grassroots coaches want. What most of them need, in addition to good ideas, is they need to have seen it done and seen all of the things you can bring to life with activity. And then they also need to have a sense of, if I sit down or squat down, I get more buy-in from the kids than standing up while the kids sit. So Deborah would know all about this as a teacher. But I ask open questions as opposed to closed questions. So I would say the grassroots coach, make sure they've got training and activity guides. Then honoring the fact that you don't pay them, so they're investing time and money in their youth coaching experience. Create opportunities where they can model and see more experienced coaches, but you've got to do that in a very low impact way. It might be a 30-minute extra when they come to get their gear. And then some of the soft skills, how to communicate, where you stand in relation to the sun, how you manage substitutions. So one thing on that line, you know, with grassroots coaches, equal playing time during the course of the season. So now nobody's looking at the stopwatch on the parent bench. And I just make sure that I know that I as the coach, know Chris played 20 minutes this game, Damon played 10, and somewhere down the season, I take care of that. Those are like little tricks that we as experienced coaches know, but if we can speed up that learning experience for that grassroots coach, they have more fun, they come back, and the kids have more fun, and importantly, the kids come back.
Yeah, brilliant. And we do a lot of those things. Obviously, you know, for our grassroots coaches, we send curriculum. We have a company we use that sends curriculum that's Rush branded. It's animated. We go through the little things in our coaches meeting. We do like a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation, and then we go out on the field and we run through a bunch of activities that were useful to the ages. What we haven't done for a while is actually say this would be a model session for this age group. These are some of the ideas, you know, and then have the coach run part of that with you. So then you can empathize with them and they can walk in your shoes and you can walk in their shoes, and so on and so forth. But we talk about how to communicate, meet with the parents. I send little samples of, here's an email you can send. We share our philosophy, and we encourage the coaches to do the same. But I love the soft skills and just doing more of that. I think is important. So. Damien, did you have a question on that or a comment? Because you're sitting there looking pretty with your favorite instructor. So.
Yeah. He hit on everything that we struggle with, I think, as directors, is that what coaches want and what they need don't always line up, right? They want a session, they want an activity plan, but ultimately that activity plan is, where do you put the cones? How many balls do you need? What color bibs do you have? But that's not coaching, right? It's what you say, how you say it, when you say it, and that it takes a massive investment of time to build relationships with these coaches. And like Chris said, in a lot of cases, the resources are limited. We have 4 fields here, and so on any given night, I've got 25 or 30 coaches going at once. So how do you manage that? And I think that's the trick now of a technical director, is that it's not necessarily, hey, here's the X's and O's, here's where the line is, and here's where you set your goal, and here's the counter goal. It's getting out there and spending time on the field with these folks and seeing who they are as a human being. What kind of a person is this coach, and what is it that I can help you learn Ian shredded me in my class, getting me to talk in less words, and here I am rambling.
We're trying to do that right now, yeah. We're going to put you on the
Yeah.
Twitter version, 140 characters or less, Damien.
Right.
Well, so what
So,
Damien's talking about there, though, as for those of the people on the call that are directors and programming at the level Damien is, sometimes it's the wood for the trees, right? So take it all the way back. You're a Rush coach. The thing we want you to do is to get the kids to sign up to be Rush players next year, because it fits the financial model, but more importantly, because we want to grow the game. So we want the 6-year-olds to sign back up and the 17-year-olds to sign up. How are we going to do that? Well, they've got to have fun. They've got to enjoy it. I mean, yeah, we could pay them or we could blackmail them, but forget that. Let's talk about what can we do that's positive. They've got to have fun. They've got to feel connected. They've got to feel like they're improving, which is why I think it's much more fun in a club like Rush, who's working with the 3rd and 2nd teams, because they've got much bigger windows of improvement potentially, and they are aware of those windows. You get the premier team that think they're the business, and maybe they're not even as open to taking the information on as the 2nd teams. But if you start breaking it down in what are we trying to achieve, get them back. How do we do it? Make it fun, teach them something, connect with them on a human basis. Okay, how do we get them better? We've got to have some good training activities. How do we make the training activities valuable? We've got to be good at communicating. So I think you can build it out. It's like an algorithm. And what's really interesting is if you knock one of those blocks out, the rest of it will tumble. So then you start looking at a coach, right? You've done all of this and you've done all of this, but you forgot to keep communicating with the kids, or you forgot to make your training activities like move them along quickly. And then you can go back and help him or her fix. But they've got to layer in that approach.
Brilliant, brilliant. And yes, they want activities, but they also want to know how to deliver them. But the most important thing is to know who's in front of you, right? As they say. But Ian, listen, I want to be sensitive to your time. I wanted to talk to you about the pledge and the game of the future, but I think what we'll do, if you're agreeable, we'll have you come back on that.
Anytime.
Right, and then what we'll do is we'll finish with some questions that I will ask you, and you get some one-word answers. Right?
I will say that Chris books us up like 6 months in advance. So if I've got to wait 6 months to be here again, he's got to book me today. But I'm very available to step in when somebody lets you down. That's what I do for Glenn Crooks on the radio all the time. I'm like a filler when somebody else like drops it.
No, I'll get you in, because we used to do 1 a month, but now it's become 3 a month. I did 4 in January, so we love having you on, and we're always so happy to have you and stuff. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go with some questions. I'm gonna ask you some questions, and you get one-word answers. The first one is football.
That's the question. Football.
Football. Yeah, you get one-word answer that comes to your mind.
Well, soccer, I guess.
Yeah, that's okay. Family.
Value.
USA.
America.
Okay. I thought you might say home. Premier League.
Quality.
Coaching.
Pleasure.
Coach development.
Critical.
Yeah, brilliant. Mentoring.
I'm going to go with enjoyable for that too.
Brilliant. And then the final one, Dave Sexton.
Legend. For me, I apologize, some of the people are too young, but if you just Google Dave Sexton, you'll see where I'm coming from.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now, listen, everybody, thanks for joining us. Ian said he wanted to get to 12,000 Twitter followers. Let's get the people on this. Ian, share us your Twitter handle, please.
Yeah,
so
it's
we can get you to 12,000.
iBarker Soccer, and a bunch of us do open source content. There's a guy called Smeds, S-M-E-D-S. Look up Smedley. He puts out tons and tons and tons of content. So iBarker Soccer, and then find Smedley. He's very, very good. Really good stuff.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now, is there any questions or things that I should have asked you but didn't?
No, what I would just say, be your audience, and Deborah, the unpaid retired PE teacher, or some of your guys that are directing clubs and paid. The Rush brand is really powerful and one that I respect immensely because I've been around since it was conceived. And be it academies or ECNL or whatever it is, I think if you're in the Rush family, you should be very proud of that. And every day when you go out to work in your Rush franchise, to some extent, you're representing all of the other Rush franchises and coaches and players. So if you're having a bad day and you're wearing the Rush gear, pick your ideas up and realize that you're representing everybody else, because I've got a ton of respect for Rush and what they've been able to achieve over many, many years in a very fluid market. So congratulations.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll see Ian again soon. I promise, maybe April. And Ian, it's brilliant. Damien, you want to close?
Cheers, Dan.
No. Okay.
He's a great Twitter follow.
There you go.
So
brilliant. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye-bye.